Hey everybody, Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about here as we finish up Reconstruction. So, yesterday I left you with a little bit of a cliffhanger over which Civil War general was going to be the president after Johnson. Yeah, it wasn't a very good cliffhanger. Because I tried to put it in your mind. Would it be Sherman? Yeah, it's clearly not. That dude's crazy. It's Ulysses S. Grant. Oh, whoever had Ulysses S. Grant, you win. All right, so in 1868, Ulysses S. Grant is going to run as a Republican because that was who's going to win at the time, and he's going to win like solidly because he was the Civil War general. When you're the head general in a war that America wins, good chance that you get to be the president if you choose to be. Ulysses S. Grant decided to be the president, and he got elected. There is one final thing I should mention that I should have said yesterday with Johnson, who had gotten impeached, and even though he was acquitted, the law that got him in trouble, the one that was the Tenure of Office Act, like the booby trap that was set for him by the radical Republicans, the Supreme Court's going to eventually say that law is bullcrap anyway and should never have existed. So the whole situation with Andrew Johnson getting impeached was very much politics based as opposed to any actual malicious criminal activity. So that was at the very end of his term. In 1868, Ulysses S. Grant is going to run for president and he's going to win. Now, if you're like, oh, okay, well, at least it's not, crazy Sherman. We'll talk more about Sherman. Sherman actually got promoted. He is now the head of the entire United States military. Because Grant is now the president. And then you're like, okay, yeah, sure. But didn't you say that Grant was an alcoholic? Yes, Grant is an alcoholic. But I should point out, and it's a well-known thing that he has been a severe alcoholic his whole life and has struggled with alcoholism his whole life. However, there is no evidence to show that his alcoholism negatively impacted him being a general or when he was president. So that's actually very much a rarity to have an addiction, yet not let your addiction control your personal life or your professional life, like as a general or as a president. So it's one of those anomalies. So President Grant becomes the president. So in 1868, a whole bunch of white people are angry because guess who gets to vote for the first time? Black people, right? Because of the 15th Amendment, black people had the right to vote. So obviously, black people are going to vote for people who aren't trying to make them be slaves again. So very few Democrat black people. So you have 4 million more people voting for Republicans. All right, this is one of the big reasons that Grant wins so heavily. Well, one of the things that happens in the South is white people are so angry that black people got the right to vote. They're going to protest this by refusing to vote. So, all the black people voted and a lot of the white people didn't in the South. In the South, places that had slaves 3 years before, freedmen, people who were slaves 3 years before, got elected to the state government in the South. All right? This is a wake-up call to the racist in the South, all right? And not in a good way. In the South, white people were like, whoa, wait a minute. Like that's like a for real thing. Like if black people vote, they can like control their own destiny. No. As soon as white people realize that the boycotting the vote isn't going to work, it actually completely backfires. Then white people in the South start creating these laws to prevent black people from voting because it becomes so obvious after the election of 1868 that black people having the right to vote is a fundamental shift in the power structure in society. So the South is going to try all these things. And we'll talk about when we get to Jim Crow laws and things further on about how black people are prevented from voting. So yesterday I had mentioned the black codes. The difference in the black codes and the Jim Crow laws. Here's what the difference is. The black codes started really before the 14th Amendment, which says everybody's a citizen, you can't have separate laws. All right, that's the black codes, actual laws that says these are just for black people. Jim Crow laws are the laws that come out after that, all right, and really after Reconstruction, because Reconstruction is going to end in 1877. We're going to talk about that today. Jim Crow laws are technically laws that apply to everybody, but it negatively impacts black people. An example is all railroad cars have to be segregated. White people sit in this railroad car, black people sit in this railroad car. By saying segregated, it's technically even for both sides. However, guess which railroad car is not nice, and guess which railroad car is not nice? So Jim Crow laws, and I think Jim Crow laws will also do stuff like, everybody has to pass a literacy test to vote, knowing that the freedmen have not don't have the ability to read and write yet, and it even gets sneakier than that. So Jim Crow laws technically are supposed to apply to everybody, but they only negatively impact black people, and it's clearly designed that way. All right. Whereas the black codes were just laws on black people that were thrown out with the 14th Amendment as unconstitutional. All right. So there's two random nicknames, carpetbaggers and scalawags, that come out at the time. A carpetbagger is named for like a northerner who goes down south to take advantage of the fact that the entire industry in the south is like on fire. So say you have a shop that makes, I don't know, knives. You have a knife shop in New York, all right? Well, after the Civil War, you could just go on down to the South and create a knife shop in the South, and you can hire the people down there that are like starving to death because there's no jobs, and pay them a fraction of what you could pay somebody up north who like has some competition for jobs. That type of person in the South is not highly respected. So they're called a carpetbagger. A carpet bag is like what luggage was made out of. You'd make luggage out of carpets. So that's where the term carpetbagger comes from, because somebody carrying luggage coming down from the north to take advantage of the really rough economic situation in the South for personal gain, and then typically they go back with their money. A scalawag. That's a Southern Republican, not a pirate term. So a scalawag, who would be a scalawag, you think, in the South? There were some Southern Republicans, like freedmen would most likely be scalawags, but they probably had a lot worse names called them than scalawags with the racial tension that was in the South. This is a picture of President Grant in 1868. Every picture I see him, he just does not seem to be happy to be there. But so Grant becomes the president in 1868. This is a picture of a carpetbagger, I guess. So I got this picture, and I should have changed it. It says Iran right here. I don't know why. That was added in afterwards. So ignore that like that doesn't exist. But this is like how the South here views the evil Northerners coming down with their carpet bags into the South. All right. So in the lifestyle in the South, there's two real ways of making money. Now, yes, almost all freedmen are going to be stuck in this situation, but there are a ton of poor white Southerners that are also in this situation. And it's really not much better than slavery. I'll be honest. Now, it is. It is. Because what's the worst part about slavery is you can't make any of your own decisions. Here is how most of the freed slaves and a lot of the poor white people in the South survived. And it's called sharecropping. So if you're a slave, and they're like, all right, you're no longer a slave, and you're like, good. Well, your skill set is to be able to grow cotton. So you can go grow cotton, but you have $0 to your name. So how do you make money? Well, you're going to grow cotton. But where? This is when sharecropping shows up. So you got a rich dude. We'll say this dude right here. Well, it is him. Rich dude shows up and gives the poor guy the ability to work his land. So rich guy owns some land and says, all right, poor guy, you can grow some cotton on my land. And the poor guy's like, cool. So, and the rich guy will actually give him the seed, give him the tools, the seed, everything that he needs to get started. All right. So the poor guy sits here and grows everything that he needs. And then once he harvests everything and gets all the cotton in, he has to give like half of the amount of his crop to the owner of the land. Well, here's what happens, and the owners do this on purpose, all right, is the amount of money that the rich landowner gave to the tenant, the amount of product that he receives from the farmer never makes up the debt. So he's always a little bit in debt at the end of the year. The only way to get out of debt is the following year, you have to give him more of your crop, which continuously keeps you in debt. So now the poor farmer, whether this is a freedman or a white guy, doesn't matter, cannot leave this farm until he has paid off his debt, because that was legal. All right, it's not anymore, but that was legal at the time. You can't leave till you pay off your debt. So you have to work for this guy. He gives you all the supplies, you grow all the stuff, you give it to him, and you can't leave. What does that sound like? Slavery. It's like slavery light. It is not as severe because, like this guy doesn't own this guy. He can't go beat this guy. They're all, it is better than slavery. But you're still stuck. And you can't leave legally and go start over somewhere else because you owe this guy money, and he makes sure you stay in debt. Here's what's crazy. Why was the South so terrified of losing slaves? Because they can't produce cotton anymore. Oh my gosh, how are we going to do it? It takes less than 5 years, and the South, after the Civil War, without slavery, produces the exact same amount of cotton without slavery. Cotton farmers are still cotton farmers. The slaves are still growing cotton. They're just doing it with sharecropping. And they're getting taken advantage of in a capitalistic society. And I think that, looking at it historically, that's the one that hurts my heart the most, is the fact that it didn't matter. Like, all their reasonings, it wasn't a real thing. That you didn't really need slavery to produce what you were producing, and that one is a hard one to justify in history. Not that there's even if the South couldn't make any cotton and the South completely financially collapsed, good, like it's worth it to not have slavery. But then to see that you could have ended this hundreds of years, you could just never have done it. And nothing would have changed. And 600,000 men died in the Civil War fighting over an institution that wasn't nearly as pivotal as people made it out to be. So this is sharecropping, all right? Here's the next situation. Tenant farming. So tenant farming, and this is just showing you kind of pictures of poor farmers. Tenant farming is actually pretty good. So that rich guy that is like loaning you the land and giving you all your materials, and you have to pay him back. Here's what tenant farming is. Just you show up to him at the start of the season and like, hey, here, I want to rent this land from you for this year. Then you get to go grow whatever you want to. You have your own equipment. He doesn't give you anything. You grow all you want, and you get to keep 100% of your crop. You sell it. You get money. You have enough left over. You rent the land again next year. Tenant farming is renting the land. This is how you can make a small profit, and you can survive. Tenant farming is so much better than sharecropping. So you're like, why didn't everybody do it? Because what's the difference? You had to start out with some money. You had to rent the land in advance. Freedmen, ex-slaves, didn't have money to start out with. So tenant farming is drastically better than sharecropping. But it wasn't as common because people didn't have money to start with. And sharecropping kept you in a state of constant debt, so you couldn't ever like gain enough money from sharecropping to switch over to be a tenant farming. All right. Let's talk about the Klan, the KKK. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just start out here with this picture of the KKK, of Klansmen. Looks probably a little different than the stuff you see in movies and on TV, and the Klan still exists today. They're a hate group. They're not technically a terrorist group as they were designated in the 1800s and the 1950s. Today they're just considered a hate group the fact that they exist. Anyway, that's a whole. Let's not get into modern stuff with the KKK because that's baffling that anybody's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to join the Klan. Like, what? Like, what went wrong in your upbringing? Whatever. So, the KKK, let's not beat around the bush. The KKK is a terrorist organization that's going to come out after the Civil War in the South to harass and murder and torture black people. All right, so let's get that. Let's go ahead and put that out there so we're all on the same page on what this is. So here's what the KKK stands for. First off, the KKK is a Christian organization. That's right. It is a Christian organization. No reason to go any more into that. But yeah, the KKK is a Christian organization, which goes to show that you can put anything under the guise of religion. Just like people talk about terrorists today. Oh, so terrorists are Muslims. All right. Like terrorist attack from 9/11, what I'm specifically talking about. They're Muslims, so therefore all Muslims must be terrorists. That's like saying, oh, everybody in the KKK is Christian, therefore every Christian must be in the KKK. That's not how that works. Very small percentages of each. Anyway, so the reason they came out, all right, and I'm trying to use logic with illogical racism, but so what happens is the KKK is going to come out in the South because there's so many men who died in the South that there's a lot of women, and keep in mind, we have a very strong family structure. That is how society is. There's a lot of women. There's no men left. Really, the only men that are, in their 20s that still exist are freed slaves. And there's this massive racially motivated fear that white and black people will start getting married and destroy white supremacy, or the cultural I don't know, whatever I can't justify the racial whatever that their fear is of that. So what the men that still are alive in the South decide to do is protect the women from the evil freedmen. All right. So the reason they wear these hoods, these white hoods, is that it's supposed to be, and nobody's actually believes that they're ghosts, like clearly, but it's like a flag. It's like a symbolism. They wear the white hoods, and eventually they will transition to the all white robes and everything in the 1920s. And we're going to talk about that when we get there. They're supposed to represent the dead Confederate soldiers. All right, so they're the ghost of the dead Confederates coming back to protect their women from black people. The KKK comes out and is an absolute terrorist organization. Lynchings take place in the South. Lynching is a terrorist activity, is to murder somebody who they feel like is getting too close to white society or anything like that. Lynching is murdering somebody, and the KKK was known for this. All right, it's an absolute terrorist organization. Now, I'm going to tell you the story of how awful the KKK is, and they get the crap beat out of them. All right, I'm going to tell you how that works. So when the KKK comes out in the late 1860s, Ulysses S. Grant is like, what? What's happening in the South? They got people dressing up like ghosts killing black people? Nah. Ulysses S. Grant's getting ready to drop a hammer. Drop an absolute hammer on the KKK. The KKK is only out for a few years, and then they disappear. All right, so the KKK disappears after a few years. I'm going to tell you how that happens here in a second. But you're like, wait a minute. The KKK doesn't just disappear. It does then. So the KKK comes out, is a terrorist organization. Ulysses S. Grant's getting ready to shut it down. It's going to be like 50 years later. And America decides that they're going to hate on immigrants in the 1920s. And they're like, man, wish we had a hate group that could just hate on these immigrants. And they're like, hey, we actually have one, still in the closet. It's called the KKK. Let's get the KKK out of the closet. I think I'm getting my analogies mixed up here. But they basically resurrect the KKK as a hate group in the 1920s to hate on immigrants, and then immediately starts attacking black people again in the 1920s, 50 years after this. So the KKK gets its start here, kind of disappears for about 50 years and comes out in the 1920s, which we'll talk about more down the road in U.S. history. So, how does Ulysses S. Grant get rid of the KKK? Here's how he does it. It's called the Enforcement Act 1870. So he's like, yeah, we're not going to have that happen anymore. So, and he comes in with a hammer, all right? He's like, we're going to get rid of them. So what he does is he goes to the mountains of North Carolina, all right? He basically makes being in the KKK illegal, but he has to know where the KKK is and what they're doing, and you know, because they try to be a secret organization. So he goes to the mountains of North Carolina. In the mountains of North Carolina, there's a whole bunch of mountain folk up in the mountains of North Carolina. There's no plantations, and so therefore there were no slaves, and therefore there's no real racism because they probably hadn't even seen a black person before. So he shows up and is like, hey, y'all want $5? Grant doesn't do it personally, but he surely sends somebody down, and they're like, $5? Yeah, what you want? He's like, I need y'all to go, since y'all are white people who aren't racist. Y'all are crazy, and y'all are weird, but you're not racist. I want y'all to go infiltrate the KKK and tell us where they are. And they're like, all right. So, like $5, I'm making that number up. I don't know how much they paid them. They had a whole bunch of mountain folk from North Carolina go infiltrate the KKK all over the place, report back to the federal government, and the federal government rolled in with all the troops at their rallies and arrested them all for being a terrorist organization. Then they got put on trial. Now, here's another cool thing about the Enforcement Act of 1870. Keep in mind how racist they are. And this is what, it's so awesome because knowing how racist these guys are, black people were not allowed on juries. That was another thing that gradual process that black people were allowed on juries, but at the time they weren't. Unless you were arrested under the Enforcement Act 1870, meaning you're a Klansman. When you go on trial, you know who a jury of your peers are? 12 black people. They pick 12 black people to be the jury for every Klansman that gets put on trial under the Enforcement Act 1870. You think any of them got off, were acquitted? No. So, and it's supposed to be like that. Like, hey, if you treat black people like that, you're going to get the same treatment, because when you show up in court, like, because when black people show up in court, guess who their peers are? 12 white people. How often do you think it's fair for a black person? So guess what? When you show up under the Enforcement Act of 1870 for terrorist activities against black people, your jury is going to be 12 black people. And Grant, the fear, I mean, that put deep fear inside the KKK of having to be judged by black people. I mean, because they're innately racist. So it disappeared like poof. Doesn't mean there still weren't lynchings and angry mobs against black people, because racism didn't disappear. Just the organized situation with the KKK is going to disappear very quickly with the Enforcement Act of 1870. But it will come out in the 1920s, 50 years later, and we'll talk about it again. And then the KKK is a whole different thing when we get there, and we'll bring it up again. All right. So Grant serves 2 terms. And he steps down. So in 1876, all the states are back in. Everybody gets to vote for the election. There's 2 dudes that are going to run for president. All right. So in 1876, the 2 guys that run for president, all right, is going to be the Republican, the guy from the North, this guy named Rutherford B. Hayes. He's going to run against the Democrat from the South, this guy named Samuel Tilden. All right. So everybody shows up. This is the first time the whole country's gotten together since the Civil War. And they're going to vote. There's a Republican and there's a Democrat running. Uh-oh. Like, the worst possible thing happens. So everybody's like talking to themselves up. They're like, okay, if the guy I don't like wins, I'm just going to go with it because we're going to hug it out. Don't want another 500,000 people to die in another war. So just be normal. So everybody's like really tense going into this election. In this election, they tie. All right. In the election, they tie. This ain't good. This ain't good at all, because they don't know who the next president is. And you can start feeling the tension rising back up in the United States. Like, it's getting ready to just rip the United States apart. And everybody's really, really panicking. So something happens it is called the Compromise of 1877. So the election happens in November of 1876. It goes into the early parts of the next year, and they don't know who the president is because they tied, and it's arguing and tensions, and everybody's like squirreling about. So what happens is these two guys, all right, meet together, and here's the conversation that happens. This is called the Compromise of 1877. Now, there is a huge part of this whole thing of Reconstruction I don't think I have mentioned, and this is shameful. Bad self. Big old part of Reconstruction. All these new laws they're putting on the South, you know how they're being enforced? They literally put the United States military in the South. So the United States military was the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, all these things the South is like, I don't want to treat black people like human beings, and the North is like, yes, you will. The entire United States military basically has the South on lockdown. They have to follow these laws. The South hates it. The South absolutely cannot stand being confined and being locked down by the United States military. They want to rule themselves because they want to be racist. That's what Samuel Tilden promises to do. Samuel Tilden wants to get all the troops out of the South, whereas in the North, Rutherford B. Hayes, he wants to keep on with Reconstruction. So that is the stage when it is tied, and these two guys meet together in the early parts of 1877, right? Because they've been tied for a couple months now. And Samuel Tilden from the South says, I tell you what, Rutherford B. Hayes, I will let you be the president. And Rutherford B. Hayes is like, all right, cool. And Samuel Tilden's like, hold on, though. If you're going to be the president, you have to pull all the troops out of the South, all right? Which will then effectively end Reconstruction, because if you can't make the South do anything, they're not going to change anymore. You're not going to reconstruct them anymore. So Rutherford B. Hayes loves Reconstruction, loves having the troops here in the South, but he's like, I also really want to be the president. And so that's what he agrees to. And it's called the Compromise of 1877. And it's going to end Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, which is going to last for 12 years, from 1865 to 1877, the lives for black people in the South got considerably better. They were released from slavery, which I guess had already happened in the Civil War. You got the 14th Amendment, made them full citizens. 15th Amendment, which gave them the right to vote. The United States government made sure the black codes were rejected. And so life had gotten better for black people in the South. After the Compromise of 1877, all the troops get pulled out of the South, and now the South is going to run the South again. And it does not get any better for black people in the South. It actually gets better. This is when the South is going to start putting in Jim Crow laws and things like that to keep black people as second-class citizens the moment the North leaves and the United States military is withdrawn from the South because of the Compromise of 1877. So Rutherford B. Hayes is allowed to be the president, but he just basically has to give up everything he believes in to be the president. And he does it. And Samuel Tilden gives up the presidency to be able to end Reconstruction for the South. And this is a picture. Basically, you hand over all your weapons and I will give you the presidency, is what Tilden is saying to Rutherford B. Hayes. All right, that's as far as we're going to get today. I will see you guys tomorrow.